All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilsim Mishpach of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Haba Aleinu Latova, Aaron and Alana Weinberg, and thanks to Hashem for all of his nisim, both the revealed and the hidden, for the miracle of Yonatan Shai Weinberg 14 years ago, for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and for the merit of the speedy arrival of Mashiach. Daniel and Batsheva Pabba of Eretz Yisrael in commemoration of the second year of Batsheva's father, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Vey, a child survivor of Auschwitz who was zocha to leave behind over 100 descendants. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Milt and Melanie Gertner, in memory of Milt's brother, Henry Gertner, Chaim ben Getzel, Zichron Livracha, and Avi and Alana Tobias, Michael and Aliza Austin, Jonathan and Alana Austin, Adam and Sarah Austin, Eitan and Elizabeth Austin, Le'iloi Nishmas, their dear aunt, Mindy Schachter Greenberg, Nechama Mindel, Bas Yitzchak Aryeh. May her neshama have an aliyah. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamos have an aliyah. All those who need a refuah should have them together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kodesh Baruch Hu Shalem Yeretz Hashem, bring Hara hostages home, b'shalom and b'karav. Allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'chol Maaseh Yedeim, and indeed deliver bracha and besoros tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. Both today's daf is Chav Zayin 27. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. We are starting on Chav Vav Amud Beis. I realized I stopped like 2 lines short of just the actual end of the sugya, but okay. So we're picking up about 16 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows. Rabba v'Rav Yosef Tarmi Tarvayu lo nitzrachas. Remember again, the Gemara was talking about the enigmatic statement of Moridin v'lo ma'alin, which again was talking about, let's say, about the min, the individual again who is the priest for Avoda Zara, Aduk for Avoda Zara, the Moser. So these individuals, an interesting verbiage where it says Moridin v'lo ma'alin. So you could put them down into the pit and you don't have to take them out, which of course the Gemara says doesn't make any sense, because obviously if you're allowed to put them in the pit, then there's no obligation to take them out. So the Gemara is explaining that what it means is once they're in the pit, you're essentially allowed to remove their what is it, egress? Is that right? You're allowed to remove their egress. You're allowed now again. In other words, essentially, if you're able to remove their exit from the pit, kind of with an excuse, then with the ila, an excuse showing that you're not actively removing it, but somehow you have some other way to justify your behavior. That's permitted. Let's say again, the min fell into the pit, and there happens to be a stone right by the pit. So you're allowed to put the stone on top of the pit. But 1 second, aren't you effectively then condemning the min to die in the pit? But you could say, no, I'm not doing anything with him in the pit. My animal just has to cross over, and I need a way for my animal to get across. So therefore, I'm not putting the stone there in order to chas v'shalom kill the guy. I'm putting the stone there to allow the animal to cross. Of course, after the animal crossed, I conveniently forget to remove the stone. Okay, Ravina says, Shemhaya Sulam Misalko. Again, if there was a ladder leading out of the pit, I could remove it. Amar Ba'ina La'achuse Bari Me'egra. I need this ladder. I need to borrow this ladder because my son is up on the roof, my cat is in the tree, whatever it is, and I need to go ahead and use the ladder to go ahead and get there. And then again, person conveniently forgets to bring the ladder back. Okay, so now we come to the very interesting sugya of bris milah. Some very interesting cases over here. We actually do need to find the time for some great halacha l'maisa avoda zara shiurim, because there's a lot of great sugyas here, and this is really fascinating as you'll see right now. Turn on. Yisrael mal es ha'ovid kochavim l'shum ger lafuke l'shumar nadalo. A Yisrael, a Jew, is allowed to circumcise a ger. Now, for what purpose? L'shum gerus. Now, okay, so that statement isn't all that novel. Of course, he's allowed to circumcise an akum for the sake of conversion. But what does this come to exclude? Lafuke l'shum marna delo. What's marna? Rashi says over here, lafuke l'shem marna tolas sheyesh ba'ar laso delo. So say, for example, let's say the akum has some type, now Rashi understands literally like murna is a worm, some type of parasite, and so the foreskin needs to be removed. So halacha l'maisa, a Jew can't do that for an akum. Now, what's the reason for that? That's our Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? A Jew cannot administer medicinal healing to an akum b'chinam, for free. For free, because he's effectively perpetuating Avoda Zara. He's perpetuating an akum's life. He can't do that. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, a Jew could circumcise an akum if the akum is converting, but he can't go ahead and circumcise him for medicinal healing. Okay? The Gemara says, listen to this. So Rabbi Meir says, no, an akum also can't circumcise a yid. Now, why not? Why not? Because we're afraid that he's going to use the opportunity to what? To kill the Jew. Now, I will say, what's fascinating about this? One would have thought that there's a bigger issue with an akum going ahead and doing bris milah, which is in general, like, how could akum do bris milah, right? How would he be allowed to perform that mitzvah on a Jew? He's not mitzvah. So it's fascinating. Again, this is coming attractions. We're going to see, we're going to get into this sugya, but it's clear that, at least according to Rabbi Meir, the concern with an akum doing a bris milah on a Jew is not an issue about the effectiveness of the mitzvah, but rather, again, it's about the concern that he may use the opportunity to kill the Jew. That's Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir. We'll say, again, to me, I know I say it probably almost every day, but what's so striking about this is, you hear this and it's like, you bristle a little bit, almost like, really? Like the akum's going to kill the Jew? And I will say, in the aftermath of October 7th, we were so shocked about the tidal wave of anti-Semitism that engulfed us here in this country, which has been so wonderful to us, that we are proud citizens of. We were so shocked by it because we literally thought that it was just like a thing of the past and it was done. And I will say, it's so important to understand the hatred is there. The animosity is there. Sometimes it's masked a little bit better, right? And sometimes it's hidden a little bit better. But it is always there. You see, Rabbi Meir says, an akum cannot do a bris milah on a Jew. Why? Because the akum wants to kill the Jew. Why? But what did we do? It's not rational. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't have an explanation. But at the end of the day, it is the way the world works. Again, we were lulled into a certain sense of safety, security, thinking that this was a bygone and a relic of the past. It's not true. This was true in the times of Chazal, and the truth is we see that it's true even in the times in which we live. It's an overwhelming reality, but a reality in which we not only have to accept, but we have to figure out how to thrive even alongside it. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, therefore, an akum cannot go ahead and give a bris milah to a Jew. Chacham say, the Chacham omrim, oved kochavim mal es Yisrael, bizman shachirim omdin al gabo. Aval beino lebeino lo. Chacham have a modified approach. Chacham say, an akum can give a bris milah. When there are other people around. Because if there are other people around, he's not going to pull any shtick. He's not going to try to kill the Jew. But just the akum and the Jew himself, he can't do. Okay, so fascinating machlokes, Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Now watch this. Rabbi Meir, what does Rabbi Meir say? Rabbi Meir Omer, afilu achirim omdim al gabo. First wide line above say chafafam beis. Nami lo dezimnin dematzli le sakino umashri le krus shavcha. No, even if there are other people around, we still don't let the akum do a bris milah on a Jew. Why not? Because even if he doesn't kill the Jew, he could maim the baby. Krus shavcha represents a type of injury, in the makom milah, where essentially that when later on the man will emit semen, so it doesn't come out. It doesn't come out in a forceful, I don't know what's the right word, like stream. It doesn't come out in a forceful stream. Now, what that does is that will often prevent a person from having children. That in halacha is called the krus shavcha. Now, what the type of injury is, we don't have to get into it right now. The point that Rabbi Meir is making is, just because there are other people there and the akum can't kill the Jew, doesn't mean he can't seriously maim him. And a krus shavcha is a very serious thing because a krus shavcha is very limited in terms of who he's allowed to marry. So therefore, essentially, he says, Rabbi Meir says, don't do it. Don't do it. The akum should have no place by milah because of either the actual threat to life or, God forbid, the actual threat of bodily injury. V'sar Rabbi Meir, so I'll say, Sar Rabbi Meir akum lo. So does Rabbi Meir hold that an akum is not allowed to do bris milah? Does he really hold that? Or minhag the Gemara is a kasha. Ir she'ein barofe Yisrael v'ish barofe kusi. So if you have a city that doesn't have a Jewish doctor, who ever heard of such a city like this? Chas v'shalom, right? So a city that doesn't have a Jewish doctor, v'ish barofe kusi, but does have a kusi doctor. Okay, so remember again. In Avoda Zara, if you've noticed, by the way, we use our terms very specifically, right? The Kusi, remember, is the guy who has had a conversion. He's quasi-Jewish, but yet, again, or I should say maybe he identifies Jewish. He identifies Jewish, right? So Lamaisa, but again, clearly his actual Jewish affiliation is suspect. So, right, so there's no Jewish doctor, but there's a Kusi doctor. The Gemara said, and there's also an Akum doctor. Sounds like the beginning of a joke. And there's also a rabbi and a priest, right? You know what I'm saying? Right? So the nice again, so no Jewish doctor, there is a Kusi doctor, and there is an Akum doctor. What's the halacha? Yomo Ovi Kochavim va'al Yomo Kusi. Rabbi Meir. Fascinating. Rabbi Meir holds, let the Akum doctor do the bris milah, and not the Kusi. Now, why is that? Look at Rashi. Yama Ovid Kochavim. Rashi says, She'ein milas l'shem avodas Kochavim, shar'ein darkam lamol espineim. Supposed to say this is fascinating. So here, Rabbi Meir is concerned like this. The Akum, the Kusi, right? The problem with the Kusim is that they were found to be worshipping Avoda Zara. Now, the Kusim believe in the mitzvah of bris milah because the Kusim believe in anything that's written in the Torah. The concern is if the Kusi does the bris, he's going to do it for the sake of his Avodah Zara. If an Akum does a bris, this is fascinating. Rabbi Meir says he's not going to do it for the sake of his deity. Why not? Why not? Because the Akum, the Ovdei Kochavim, they don't have bris milah. So in other words, there's no religious rite of circumcision by an akum. So therefore, again, because the act has no religious significance for him, he's not going to do it for the sake of his idolatry. Supposed to hear how fascinating this is? The Kusi, who does believe in Torah Shebichsa, but yet worships Avodah Zara, so when he does the bris milah on a Jewish child, we're concerned he's going to do it for the sake of his deity, of his Avodah Zara. Rabbi Meir says, therefore, don't have him do it. When the akum does the bris milah, why is he doing it? Why is he doing it? Why is he doing it? Because the Jew asked me to do it. Right? He has no theological affiliations or no theological thoughts when he does that bris milah because he doesn't have a shaykhus to bris milah. So what's the point over here is Rabbi Meir holds in this brisa. Rabbi Meir is saying that halacha l'maisa akum can do a bris milah. Rabbi Yehuda says yamol kusi v'al yamol ovi kochavim. Rabbi Yehuda says no, don't do that. Let ultimately again let the Kusi do it and not the Akum, because Rabbi Yehuda is afraid of shlichus tam, he's afraid of bloodshed. Point over here is Rabbi Meir is contradicting himself. Right before Rabbi Meir said under no circumstances can a Kusi go ahead and do bris milah because we're afraid of shlichus tam, we're afraid of bloodshed. And here in the Brisa we're saying if there's a choice, obviously he's not the optimal candidate, but if all you have is a Kusi and an Akum, let the Akum go ahead and do it. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, says, let the Kusi do it, not the Ovei Kochavim, because we are afraid of bloodshed at the hands of the Kusi. To which the Gemara says, Eipoch, just switch it around. Switch around the Shitas. Rabbi Meir Omer Yamol Kusi v'lo Oved Kochavim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Oved Kochavim v'lo Kusi. Okay, so Rabbi says, so switch the Shitas, just the line, just switch this Brisa, so it aligns with the previously aforementioned statement of Rabbi Meir, namely that better to have an Oved Kochavim and not a Kusi. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Oved Kochavim Shapir Dami. 1 second. So now you're saying, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that an Akum can do a bris milah? Vatani, we learned. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Minayin Lamila Ba'Oved Kochavim Shub So now we get into the kishkas of the sukkah. It's very interesting. Huda says, how do you know that if an Oved Kochavim does a bris milah, it's puzzle? It doesn't work. How do you know this? Shenemar vi'ata es brisi tishmar. Ultimately, again, the pasuk says vi'ata, and now as brisi. So this is Kadosh Baruch Hu saying to Avraham Avinu, and now you ata as brisi tishmar, keep my bris. Keep my bris, or guard my bris. They both say we're going to see exactly what that drasha is. What exactly is that pasuk teaching me? Emir Hashem will see in a little bit. So Mar says Elo li olam lo seifach. So therefore, again, you can't switch around the shitas because again, remember when we switched it around in an effort to align the two positions of Rabbi Meir, we ended up creating a contradiction between Rabbi Huda, the positions of Rabbi Huda. Therefore, the Gemara says, don't switch around the Brisa. I said, how do I reconcile it? I'm asking on what's the case over here. In other words, where does Rabbi Meir allow for an akum to do a bris milah, top of Chav Zayin, berofe mumcha, an expert doctor? And Rashi says over here, what's an expert doctor? Lomara nafshi l'shavuye krush shavcha. An expert doctor has a reputation to protect. And more important than his reputation, well, as important as his reputation is his parnasa. He is not going to mess around with a bris milah of a Jewish child, because if he does so and it becomes discovered, his career goes up in flames. So therefore, again, Rabbi Meir says, whereas normally a stam akum who has nothing to lose, we will not let him do bris milah because we are very afraid that at worst he may take life, and even if he doesn't take life, he will maim the child. But Rabbi Meir says there is an exception. When the akum is an expert doctor, where his career is riding on this, he's not going to take advantage of the situation to harm the Jew, ultimately, again, at the risk of his career. And again, we see others hold of this as well. If the akum himself is a mumcha l'rabim, right? If the akum himself ultimately is someone who is known as an expert to the general population, then halacha l'maisa, it becomes mutter. Incredible. For Sav Rabbi Huda, Kusi Shaber. Now again, the Gemara jumps back. Does Rabbi Huda hold that a Kusi is allowed to do a bris milah? Does he really hold that? Tanya, we learn Yisrael malas hakusi v'lekusi lo yamol Yisrael. The Gemara says, so yet we learn in the Brisa, a Yisrael could give a bris to a Kusi, but a Kusi cannot give a bris to a Yisrael. Why not? Shemal l'shem hagrizim. Because interest, as we said before, because we are concerned that the Kusim, when they do bris milah, they do bris milah for the sake of their Avoda Zara. Now, again, the Gemara calls it har grizim. And now, why does it call it har grizim? Because the Gemara elsewhere, the Gemara discusses, the Gemara in Maseches Chulin discusses that the Kusim were discovered to be worshipping a dove-like image that they kept on har grizim. So that's what it means. They didn't literally worship har grizim. They're worshipping an idol that was on har grizim. So the Gemara says, therefore, again, a Kusi can't circumcise a Jew. Why not? Because halacha l'maaseh, we're concerned that his circumcision is going to be done. He's doing it l'shem the Avoda Zara. The Gemara says, Divi Rabbi Huda, that's Rabbi Huda's logic. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi said, 1 second. So again, top of Chav Zayin, 6 lines down. So now we get into the kishkas of this. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi. V'chi heichon matzino mila min haTorah l'shma. So Rabbi Yossi, this is fascinating. And now this becomes the primary question. Does bris milah have to be done l'shem mitzvah? Does it have to be done l'shem mitzvah? Or is it enough simply to go through the mechanistic motions? In other words, maybe the mitzvah of bris is simply the removal of the arla, the removal of the foreskin. Who says it requires l'shma? Who says it requires intentionality for the sake of the mitzvah? Maybe you just need to know, again, specifically, physically, what needs to get done. Do that, and you're good to go. You're good to go. Now, obviously, Abosai, this whole discussion about an akum and a kusi, the whole discussion is predicated on the fact that what? That these opinions hold that milah needs to be lishma. So this is fascinating. It comes along, Rabbi Yossi says, hold up. How do you know that bris milah has to be done lishma? So the Gemara says, Ella, mal v'holich achatetzei nishmasa. So the expression over here is very interesting. So Rabbi Yossi says, rather let the kusi do bris milah, let him circumcise as many kids as he wants until he dies. Which is another expression as he's allowed to do bris milah. So again, whether it's a kusi, whether it sounds like even an akum, right, should be allowed to do bris milah because bris does not need to be done lishma. It's fascinating. You both say so. Just by the way, it sounds strange a little bit, especially since we're conditioned like a moel and things like this. But again, it could very well be, but Rabbi Yossi is saying is like circumcision itself is like building a sukkah. In other words, we'll say, what is the mitzvah of bris milah? What is the mitzvah of bris milah? What is it? To be circumcised. To be circumcised. The removal of the arla could very well be the hechsher mitzvah. And hechsher, the preparatory act, hechsher doesn't necessarily mean to be Lishma. The same way, now Sukkah is not really the best example of this, because by Sukkah, actually, the schach does have to be put down Lishma, L'Shem Mitzvah Sukkah, which is very important. That's why even if you have someone non-Jewish go ahead and construct your Sukkah, you have to at least lift up the schach and put it back down, just even like a symbolic lifting and putting back down L'Shem Sukkah. But other examples, of just Hechsher Mitzvah, that where the preparatory act, the Ikar is the act itself, Sukkah is still a good example of this, because Lamaisa, the mitzvah is not to build the Sukkah, the mitzvah is to sit in the Sukkah. So perhaps the mitzvah is not to administer circumcision, the mitzvah is to be circumcised. And therefore, halacha lamaisa, it doesn't really matter who does the circumcision itself. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, let's go back. Now I will say, all of this is still a little bit of a mess, because every single time we try to remedy the position of Rabbi Huda, we mess up Rabbi Meir. If we do Rabbi Meir, we mess up Rabbi Huda. Therefore, the Gemara says, let's go back and let's switch around the brayso like we said originally, to switch the positions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda in order to align Rabbi Meir. The Kakashi Rabbi Huda, and that's which raised the Kash Rabbi Huda. Hahi Rabbi Huda Hanasihi. There's two different Rabbi Hudas. There's Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Huda Hanasi. The Sanya, Rabbi Huda Hanasi Omer, Minayin Lamila Ba'avi Kocham Shipsula. How do we know that an akum can't do bris milah? Shne'emar. So I'm sorry, Tamalomar. V'ata es brisi tishmar. So Rabbi said, so this is an interesting drasha over here. V'ata es brisi tishmar. This is Hashem talking to Avraham Avinu. So what is that drasha? What that drasha says is like this: the only people who are allowed to do bris milah are Zara of Avraham Avinu, offspring of Avram, which means only Jews are allowed to do bris milah. That's it. In other words, we're talking about who could actually perform the circumcision. V'yatas brisi tishmar is Hashem telling Avraham Avinu that for all future generations, I want your offspring to preserve the mitzvah of milah. So your children could perform milah. No one else can perform milah. Okay, incredible. Amar Rav Chisda, my time Rabbi Huda. What's Rabbi Huda's logic? Rabbi Huda says, therefore, that Allah Chalamaisa. Remember, a kusi can't do milah, an akum can't do milah. Why? D'chsiv LaHashem Himo. Ultimately, I will say, what is LaHashem Himo? LaHashem Himo means that, I should say this for a kusi, that a bris milah has to be done for the sake of the mitzvah. Now, fascinatingly enough, what this yields is the following result according to Rabbi Huda. Therefore, a kusi can't do bris milah. Why not? Why not? Because we are concerned that if a kusi does bris milah on a yid, on a Jew, what intention does he have? What intention does he have? For his avoda Zara. As opposed to an akum. If an akum does the milah on a Jew, so what intention does he have? What intention does he have? For the Jew. Because remember again, I will say, an akum has no competing allegiance when it comes to bris milah, because he has no mitzvah of bris milah. It's fascinating. The only time that we are concerned with corrupted theological, spiritual intention is when there is a parallel spiritual service of the person performing the mitzvah. So therefore, for example, the kusi, who has the mitzvah of bris milah, but yet when he does it for his dove god that sits on Har Grizim. We don't want to. He can't do the milah for us because he's going to do it with corrupted intention. The akum, fascinatingly enough, has no corrupted intention because he has no mitzvah of bris milah. So the akum does the mitzvah of bris milah for the Jew. Who is he doing it for? He's doing it for the Jewish mitzvah. It's fascinating, right? We'd rather have an akum do the bris than a kusi do the bris. Incredible. Hashem Yimo. Rabbi Yossi, Himo Yimo. Rabbi Yossi darshins Himo Yimo. Now both say Himo Yimo is a riboy, which essentially means anyone could do bris milah. So we'll say, what you begin to see over here is a fundamental machlokes about whether or not bris milah requires lishma. Does bris itself have to be done for the sake of the mitzvah? So there's really three different drashas over here. Drasha number one is v'atas brisi tishmar, where Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, only your descendants can do bris milah. Okay, that's number one. Number two, LaHashem Yimol. LaHashem Yimol. Milah has to be done for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? So that would also say that only one who could do it. Now, I will say there's a lot of nafkaminas, right? Because according to Atas Brisi Tishmar, sounds like no one but Jews could do bris milah. Doesn't matter intention, no one but Jews could do bris milah. LaHashem Yimol. Milah has to be done for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Which sounds like, again, therefore, a kusi can't do it. An akum can do it. And then Rabbi Yossi, Himol Yimol, which sounds like you don't really need intentionality by bris milah at all, and anyone could circumcise. Anyone could circumcise. So just keep all of this. This is now all swirling around. V'idach haksiv laHashem himo. But what does the other opinion do with Rabbi Yehuda's laHashem himo? Hahu bePesach ksiv. That's not written by bris milah. That's written by Karban Pesach. You can't bring a raya from that to bris milah in general. That phrase ultimately again appears by Karban Pesach. The Gemara says, "V'idach nami haksiv himo yimo." What does the other opinion do with himo yimo? Dibra Torah kala shomanei adam. Ultimately, and that's just an expression. That's just the Torah speaking in the vernacular. So therefore we are stuck, not stuck, but we have the schus to be embedded over here in a dramatic machlokes about bris milah, about whether or not, and again, the implications over here are so far-reaching about who has the ability to perform this mitzvah. So we're not finished. Itmar, here we go. So how do we know that if an Ovid Kochav if an Akum does bris milah, it's possible? Daru bar Papa Mishmei Derav Amar, V'ata es brisi tishmar. Shabbos says, so ultimately, Daru bar Papa, in the name of Rav, says, quotes the pasuk, V'ata es brisi tishmar, which again means only offspring of Avram Avinu have the ability to perform bris milah. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says, Himol Yimol. Rabbi Yochanan says ultimately, Himol Yimol. They both say, now watch this drasha. Watch this drasha. The way Rabbi Yochanan says Himol Yimol is like this. He vocalizes it as Hamal Yimol. Only one who is circumcised can circumcise someone else. Okay, you hear this? So again, I both say, so remember, just follow the flow over here. The Brisa begins with a statement. How do I know that an akum is not allowed to give bris milah? How do I know that? So opinion number one, Rav says, V'yatas brisi tishmar, you have to be part of the covenant of Avram Avinu. You have to be the offspring of Avram Avinu. Okay, that's opinion one. Opinion two, Himol Yimol, which we are vocalizing as Hamol Yimol. He who is circumcised can in turn circumcise others. So we'll say, so they both pretty much saying the same thing, which is that an akum can't circumcise. My benayu. So what's practical difference? We'll say, get ready for this. Aravi mahol, the gavnuni mahol iko benayu. What happens if you have a circumcised Gentile? Now we'll say, again, we know by the Arabs, right? By the Muslims, they have bris milah also. So let's say you have a circumcised Arab or a circumcised gavnuni. Gavnuni were apparently people who also did circumcision. In other words, what happens if you have a circumcised Gentile? Can a circumcised Gentile perform a mitzvah on a Jewish child? So watch this. Man da'amar himol yimol ika. So again, if you dash in himol yimol, which means hamol yimol, which means one who is circumcised can circumcise others. Therefore what? As long as the moel himself is circumcised, even if he's not Jewish, he can do bris milah. On the other hand, Oman Damar as brisi tishmar, but if you hold this brisi tishmar, which means it has to be done by the offspring of Avraham Avinu, leka, then only a Jew could do it. Both say fascinating, no? Fascinating, leka. Ulaman Damar himo yimol ika. 1 second, is that true? Is that true that if you hold himo yimol or hamol yimol, that a circumcised Gentile could do bris milah? Is that really true? V'hatanan we learned konam. She'eni nana minarelim. Listen to this, both. A person makes a neder, right? A neder, I will hereby not get any benefit from uncircumcised people. All right, how that plays out, like in the office and stuff like that, I'm not sure, right? Okay, but fine, right? I take a neder. I'm not getting any hana from uncircumcised people. So what's the halacha? It's fascinating. Mutar be'erli yisrael v'asar b'muli ovi kochavim. You are permitted to get benefit from uncircumcised Jews and not permitted to get benefit from circumcised Gentiles. Now, both say, now what's the logic there? Alma afagav de mahile command lo mahilidam. Where also what you see over here is like this. The term orel is a categorical statement as opposed to a physically descriptive statement, meaning that an akum is considered to be an orel even if he is physically circumcised, and conversely, a Jew is considered to be a mol even if he is physically uncircumcised. So if that's the case, then you can't use the drasha of himol yimol to teach me that a circumcised Gentile could go ahead and circumcise a Jew. Ella, the Gemara says, Ella ika benayu, Rather, I will say, what would be the nafkamina between the drashas? Yisol shamesu achav machmas mila v'lo maluhu. So I'll say, this is an interesting case. What happens if you have a Jew whose brothers died as a result of bris milah? We'll say, the Gemara talks about this case, where let's say, again, you have a boy whose previous two, the machlokes, 2 or previous 3 brothers died as a result of bris milah. I will say, now, contemporarily, we know that this was hemophilia, right? This was hemophilia. So therefore, our older brothers died of bris milah. So the halacha is, if you know that the older brothers died of bris milah, we do not circumcise this child. We do not. So I will say, so now, can this uncircumcised child, who is again, he's uncircumcised, what's the right word? By like license. In other words, the Torah says, do not circumcise him. Is he allowed to give bris milah to someone else? So the man brisi tishmar ika. So according to the drasha as brisi tishmar, he is an offspring of Avram Avinu, and therefore he can give a bris milah. The man damar himal yimal leka. But according to the drasha that says himal yimal or hamal yimal, that you need to be circumcised in order to circumcise others, he would not be permitted to give bris milah. Or the man damar himal yimal leka. Is that true? Is that true? V'hatnan. Listen to this. Kol name shani nana mimulim. If a person makes a neder, I'm not going to get hana from anyone who has a bris milah. Asur be'erli Yisrael. See, he is not permitted to get benefit from uncircumcised Jews. Umuter b'moli oved chotim. But can get benefit from circumcised akums. What do you see from here? Once again, I will say, you see that the status or the term arel is categorical and not physically descriptive. Alma, afagav deloma hili, command hili. Therefore, again, I will say, an uncircumcised Jew still has the status, ultimately, of a circumcised individual. Ella ika b'nai, rather, what's an nafkamina? This is fascinating. Get ready for this. Isha. Is a woman allowed to do bris milah? Is a woman allowed to do bris? Can a woman be a moel? So watch this. So the Gemara says, "L'man damar ve'atas brisi tishmar leka." So again, if you go as es brisi tishmar, so then again, no, because it won't work. Why? Because whoever of your descendants essentially is in bris milah, they could give bris milah to someone else. Listen to this: the isha la bas milahi, u'leman damar himal yimal ika. Listen to this. But according to the one who says himal yimal or hamal yimal, then a woman can do bris milah. Why? The isha kiman demihili damya. Because a woman is like one who is circumcised. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? So essentially, a woman obviously doesn't have the status of being an arel, right? Since she's not an arel, so what is she? In other words, it's almost like in Yiddishkeit, there's really only one of 2 statuses. Either you're mal or not, you're nimal, or you are an arel. So if she's not an arel, by definition, she's a nimal, which sounds strange, right? But categorically, that's where she fits in. If that's the case, she should be able to do bris milah. Incredible. One second. Everyone agrees a woman can do bris milah. Everyone agrees, right? Is there anyone who holds that a woman can't do bris milah? After all, the Gemara of Haksiv, Vatikach tzipora tsar. They both say one of the strangest stories in the Chumash. Vahi baderach b'malon, vayifkasher Hashem v'akesh hamiso. Moshe, again, I both say the Torah gives absolutely no background to this story. All we know that Moshe and Zipporah are on the way down to Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu is seeking out lodging for his family. A malach encounters him. The malach is about to kill him. And in the midst of this whole story, what happens? Zipporah takes a sharpened stone and she circumcises her son. And suddenly, again, Moshe Rabbeinu is saved. It's a strange story, not for today. So what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see that a woman absolutely can do bris milah. Zipporah did bris milah, to which the Gemara says, Kari be vatakach. No, don't read it as vatikach, that she took it. Rather, read it as vatakach, she caused to be taken. She got someone else, another man, to do the bris milah. V'haksiv vatichros. But it says vatichros, that she cut. Karibei vatikares, she caused to be cut. The amri leinish achrina va'avid. Perhaps Zipporah found someone else. There was someone else there, and she asked them to do the bris milah. The other possibility is asya ihi va'askala va'asa Moshe va'admara. The other possibility is that perhaps Tzipora began the bris milah, then Moshe Rabbeinu was released from the clutches of the malach, and Moshe Rabbeinu came and finished up the bris milah afterwards. Fascinating. So if you notice over here, the Gemara does not end with resolution over here. It's like, what do we do with this? So I just want to share this with you. This is a fascinating sugya, but I'm not going to do it justice. But I just at least want to read you the halacha. So in Yoradeya, Simin Reish Samech Dalid, halacha Aleph, which is the halachos of bris milah. Get ready for this. Hakol ksherim lamo. This is the mechaber. Everyone is permitted to give bris milah. Filu, eved, isha, katan, arel yisrael shamesu acham achamas milah. So we'll say, mechaber paskins, everyone is permitted. When you notice over here, everyone ultimately again is Jews and quasi-Jews, because he includes Eved over here, Eved Kinani. Eved Kinani is quasi-Jewish. So everyone is permitted to go ahead and give bris milah. However, what he does say is, Vim yesh Yisrael gadol she'odeh lamo hu kodem lakol. Obviously, if you have an adult Jewish male who knows what he's doing, right, kind of knows what he's doing is in parentheses for everyone, right? But lamaisa, if you have an adult Jewish male, that's ideal. That's ideal. But the Mechaber literally paskins that everyone is permitted to do bris milah. Now the Rama says over here, V'yish omrim, the isha lo tamol, v'chei noagin lahadar achar ish. Now the Rama says, some say a woman should not do bris milah, right? And therefore again, the Rama himself says, ideally one should find a man to do bris milah. But again, even the Rama is understanding that b'diavad, the bris milah of a woman absolutely works. So mamish, like every Jew could do bris milah. Avol, Ovid kochavim afilu hu mahol lo yamol klal. However, the Mechaber paskins that an akum should not do bris milah. Should not do bris milah, even if he himself is circumcised. But watch this. V'im mal in tzarech lachzer v'lamol pam shenis. But this is fascinating. What happens if the Ovid kochavim did do a bris milah? You don't have to go back and do it again. Now, by the way, when we say do it again, that's called hatafas dambris. What they'll do is they'll do like a needle prick in order to draw blood. So look what the Mechaber says. So the Mechaber says that halacha l'maisa, every single Jew, first we'll start with Yosei Karo. Every single Jew is permitted to do bris milah, and technically even a woman is permitted to do bris milah. The Rama, better not to have a woman, better to go ahead and have a man. But again, b'diavad a woman works. However, an akum should not do bris milah, but if the akum did do bris milah, you need not do it again. Which tells you what? That if the akum did bris milah, what? B'diavad is kasher. Says the Taz, why? Get ready for this. It's fascinating. De lo matzinu batorah milah lishma. Because we do not find that the mitzvah of milah has to be done lishma. That the mitzvah of milah is a mechanistic mitzvah that as long as mechanistically it adheres to certain details, you're good to go. You're good to go. Not ideal. So again, ideally we want a Jewish adult male to do it. But b'diavad, if anyone does it, even an akum, ultimately it'll work. Now, the Rama vehemently disagrees on this last piece, and he says, "V'ish omrim techayovim lahachzir or lahatif mimeno dabris." No. If an akum does the bris, it is not good, and therefore again the Ramah paskins you have to do the needle prick and you have to draw blood again. You cannot for a lie. So raging machlokes in Mechaber and the Ramah if an akum does bris. But at the end of the day, what's driving all of this seems to be that halacha l'maisui paskin that we really don't find milah lishma. And therefore, halacha l'maisa bidi eved, even if the akum did, at least according to the Mechaber, you wouldn't have to do hatafas dambris. According to the Rama, you'd have to do hatafas dambris. And now afterwards, there's a whole discussion over here about what happens if a mummer does bris. Again, we're not going to get into it today, but point over here is it seems that halacha understands that me'ikar adin, there is no obligation of milah lishma. Certainly, again, any form of Jew could do it, even an eved. Right, an isha, lechatchila shouldn't, but bidi eved can. Akum, mechaber, bidi eved is going to be okay. Rama have to do atafas dambris again. Incredible. All right, I'll say Mishnah. A lot more to do on that, but I just wanted to show you at least the kind of the headlines. Mishnah, misrabin mehen ripoy maman avalo ripoy nefashos. You could accept medicinal healing from an akum. Now, we don't know what these terms mean in the Mishnah. We'll see what it means in the Gemara. Ripoy maman. But not, right, what we'll call a healing of mammon, but not healing of nefashos. We'll see what that means. Rameir says, you cannot get a haircut from an akum. Now, why can't you get a haircut from an akum? Because also, again, they would use a razor and the concern was that he would slit the throat of the Jew. That's literally, I guess. So no haircuts on the akum. Again, Chum say you can get a haircut as long as it's in public, but not in private, right? So you can't go to the akum salon, right? But you can go ultimately again in the public area. You can do that because he's not going to do anything in public. Okay. So it says my ripoy maman and my ripoy nefashos. So what does it mean that you right? What do these terms mean? Ilema ripoy maman b'schar ripoy nefashos bechinam. So maybe it means like this. Maybe ripoy maman means that you're paying for his medicinal services, and ripoy nefashos means it's free. So then say that. Listening mishaben mischar v'lo bechinam. So then literally explicitly say that. Ella ripoy mammon, rather ripoy mammon meaning davar she'in bo sakana. Ripoy nefashos davar she'yesh bo sakana. Rather about saying maybe the terms mean something different. Ripoy mammon means you could accept medicinal healing from an akum when it's not something life-threatening. In other words, your life is not at risk. Ripoy nefashos means something that is life-threatening. So you could accept non-life-threatening medical intervention from an akum, but you cannot accept life-threatening medical intervention from an akum. But Rabbi Yehuda said, really, you shouldn't have any type of medicinal healing from an akum, even just like the puncturing of a bloodletting needle, which is a nothing. You shouldn't do that with an akum either. So the Gemara says, Allah, ripoy maman behemto, ripoy nefashos gufei. Rather, the Gemara suggests like this: ripoy maman means veterinary care. Veterinary care. You can go to an akum veterinarian. That's fine. But again, do not go to an akum doctor for your own physical healing. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda said that even the puncture of a bloodletter's needle, do not go to an akum. So we'll say fascinating. So therefore, the Gemara seems to end off over here saying that ripoy mammon means veterinary care. That you can go to an akum for. But ripoy nefashos, which means again medical care for yourself, that you should not go to an akum for. But if an akum doctor tells you, by the way, this medicine is good, this medicine is bad, you can listen to that advice. Why? We'll say Amud Beis Savar Shiyuli Mashilo. It's because again the akum assumes I'm just asking him advice. And whenever you ask advice, you're supposed to say, what do Jews do when we ask advice? What do we do? We never ask one person, right? We never ask one person, right? There's always got to be a second opinion, a third opinion. So therefore, the Gemara says, the akum knows, kihechi de mashalo, mashala in a shachrina. The same way that I'm asking the akum doctor, I'm going to be asking other doctors as well, other people as well. And therefore, again, the akum's not going to want to in any way compromise his own standing by being viewed as someone who gives deleterious advice. Incredible. So Amrav Yochanan, Safek Chai, Safek Meis, Emisrapid Mehen. So I'll say this is a fascinating case. Let's say a Jew is afflicted with an ailment. He needs medical intervention. And again, it's a situation where, again, Safek Chai, Safek Meis. If he can die from this particular ailment. Look at Rashi. It's in the third line from the top in Rashi. Safek Chai, Safek Meis. Choli, Shemlo Yerpaenu, Rofe, Safek Yichya, Safek Yamos, Emis Rapid Mehen, Dovek Ochavim, Vandai Katale, Mutov Shianiach, Ula Yichya. It's supposed to be fascinating. So let's say a Jew is suffering from an ailment, and again, it's potentially fatal. Maybe he will die, maybe he won't. The Gemara says, don't go to an akum doctor, because the akum doctor will absolutely find a way to take your life in that situation. Vaday meis misrapin mehen. But because we'll say why? Because there, the Gemara's understanding is better to take your chances. In other words, you may survive without medical intervention. So if you go to the akum, chances are he's going to do something to adversely impact you. There's a chance of survival even without medical intervention. Better to take your chances without relying on the akum doctor. Let's say the Jew has a medical ailment where he's definitely going to die. He's definitely going to die. In that case, the Gemara says, you have nothing to lose going to the akum doctor, so you might as well try it. The Gemara says, 1 second. Meis, that's not true. Because even if a person has a medical ailment from which he's going to definitely die, the point over here is the akum could still expedite his death, right? And Lamais, again, right now he's still alive. The Gemara says, means they're both saying, there's still the momentary life that I'm living. In other words, right now, okay, the Jew might have a terminal ailment, but right now he's alive. If he goes to the Akum, doesn't he run the risk ultimately again of expediting his demise? To which the Gemara says, L'chaye sha'a lo chashinan. Ultimately, again, we're not worried about that. So we'll say, if it's a choice over here, in this case, if the Jew has a terminal illness and he's going to die, he's definitely going to die, and his only chance of survival is the Akum doctor, whereas I realize that the Akum doctor may kill him and ultimately deprive him of even these moments of life now, the possibility of being cured still outweighs that. We're not worried about the potential loss of his immediate life. How do you know that she's not choshesh v'chayisha? In other words, this will say something fascinating. That what the Gemara is suggesting is like this: if a person is in a situation where the only feasible outcome of my circumstances is death, and there's one chance to potentially, there's one pathway to life, but that one pathway to life carries with it the possibility of what? Of more immediate demise. Right, you hear the choice over here? I know that I know for sure that at the end of the day, my situation is such that I'm going to die. I know that. The illness, the circumstance, there's one option of salvation, but the downside of that one option of salvation is that if it goes wrong, it results in immediate death. So even if that comes at the risk of immediate death, right? So in the case of the Akum doctor, go to the Akum doctor because perhaps, again, because you might be cured, even though, again, you risk losing what we call your chaye shah, which means your immediate life. So the Gemara says, where do we know that we're willing to sacrifice chaye shah, which means temporary immediate life, for the sake of some possible long-term salvation? Where do we know that from? So interestingly enough, the Gemara brings a raya from Navi, which is fascinating. The Gemara says, Im amarenu navo ha'ir v'arav ba'ir umasnu sham. So we'll say, the Gemara tells a story. In the days of Yehoram, there was a siege that Aram laid on Yerushalayim. They laid siege to Yerushalayim. There was massive famine. The Gemara tells a story. The Navi tells us about these four lepers who were on the outskirts of the city. They were dying of starvation. They said, look, either we're going to die here of starvation, or maybe what we could do is we can go to the military camp of Aram. Now, when we go to the camp and beg for food. Now, when we get to Aram, the military camp, they may kill us on the spot because we're Jews, but maybe we'll get food. So they decided better to go to the camp of Aram with the possibility of getting food, knowing full well that's what? They may be killed on the spot. So we'll say, because again, why? Because what's the other option? Die of starvation. In other words, the only possibility right now that we have in front of us is die of starvation. So we can go to the camp of Aram, beg for food, maybe be killed on the spot, lose that chaye shah, but that's our only shot of salvation. And they went. So the Gemara says, from this story you see that we are willing to sacrifice immediate temporary life for some potential form of long-term salvation. Incredible. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so we're not worried about Chayisha. We'll say, by the way, the Musar Haskell on this is absolutely so profound, right? That we are willing, the halacha says, we are willing to give up Chayisha, temporary life, for the sake of some potential possible salvation. We'll say, every single day, we are tempted to commit averos. Every day, every moment. So we'll say, what's the strategy? Like, how do we overcome it? And we've been continuing this our entire lives. So I'll say, the Gemara says something so fascinating over here. Sometimes the most important thing you could do in life is give up your immediate gratification and benefit for some long-term goal. When faced with temptation, I'm at this incredible crossroads. I could indulge this desire right now, and it'll feel good, it'll feel great, but I'm sacrificing so much of my future for it. Or I can find the courage to give this up now, to not indulge this now. I'm willing to sacrifice this now. Why? Because if I sacrifice this now, it puts me on the path to long-term salvation. Now, obviously, it's easy to speak in dispassionate, analytical terms when we're not being actively tempted by our desires and wants. But I both say, but this calculation, this is what it is. This is the sacrifice of chaye shah. The halacha says, let's be willing to give up immediate temporal gratification and life for the sake of something bigger in the long run. If we could figure out how to do that in life, that is the secret to our spiritual success. Rabbi, we'll have to stop over here for today. Again, fasting sugya. We'll pick up with the Meisvei Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Yeah, we're good. I'm just trying to keep looking for the short. Oh, there's one. There's a short daf next Wednesday. We're gonna be fine. Don't worry about it. I'll say shkayach everyone. We always catch up. Shkayach, we're gonna have a great day, Chevra. Have a wonderful day.
This may be the sugya, I don't know, the specific for vaccines. This is like you'd have an allergic reaction to vaccine, or the vaccine saved your life.